During a violent ambush at sea, a pirate captain narrowly escapes death when his mischievous monkey unexpectedly saves his life, alerting him to danger just in time. What began as a ship's joke suddenly turns serious as the crew watches their captain forge an unbreakable bond with the animal. But when the monkey's strange behavior later reveals hidden secrets aboard the ship, the entire crew is left stunned, realizing their captain's unlikely companion may change the fate of them all. The Caribbean waters have seen many tales of treasure and betrayal, but none quite like this. Captain Blackwood thought he knew every soul aboard his vessel, trusted every man who served under his command. He never imagined that salvation would come from the one crew member he never took seriously. But what happens when that same monkey begins acting strangely around certain members of the crew? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered deck of the Siren's Revenge, a formidable three-masted brigantine that had earned her reputation through countless battles in the Caribbean's treacherous waters. Captain Marcus Blackwood stood at the helm, his weathered hands gripping the ship's wheel with the confidence of a man who had commanded these waters for nearly 2 decades. At 45, he bore the scars and wisdom of countless encounters with both nature and enemy vessels, his dark beard streaked with premature silver that caught the morning light like sea foam. The crew moved about their morning duties with practiced efficiency, each man knowing his role in the intricate dance of maintaining a vessel that served as both home and weapon. 28 souls called the Siren's Revenge their floating sanctuary, bound together by articles of agreement and the shared understanding that their survival depended on trust and competence. The ship herself was a masterpiece of practical design, her black hull decorated with gold trim that spoke to successful ventures, while her cannon ports promised swift retribution to any who dared challenge years crew's claim to these waters. In his cabin below, Blackwood kept his most prized possessions, hand-drawn navigation charts that revealed secret routes through treacherous reefs, hidden anchorages known only to a select few, and safe harbors where pirates could find sanctuary from both storms and pursuing naval vessels. These charts represented years of careful exploration and hard-won knowledge, each marking the result of calculated risks and narrow escapes. The captain guarded these secrets jealously, understanding that in the world of piracy, information often proved more valuable than gold or silver. Among the crew's most unusual members was Coconut, a small brown monkey whose antics provided daily entertainment for men who spent months at sea with little diversion beyond their duties and occasional shore leave. The creature had joined the crew 3 months prior, when they'd rescued survivors from a Spanish merchant vessel that had run aground on a coral reef. The monkey's previous owner had perished in the wreck, leaving the animal to fend for itself until Blackwood's men discovered it, clinging to floating debris, chattering pitifully at its rescuers. Initially, several crew members had argued for leaving the animal behind, viewing it as an unnecessary burden that would consume precious supplies while contributing nothing to their survival. However, Blackwood had overruled their objections, perhaps moved by some instinct he couldn't quite explain. The decision had proven popular with most of the men, who found the monkey's playful nature a welcome distraction from the harsh realities of their chosen profession. Coconut had quickly established himself as the ship's unofficial mascot, though his mischievous tendencies often tested the crew's patience. The animal possessed an uncanny ability to locate and sample any unguarded food, regardless of how carefully it had been secured. He regularly made off with personal belongings that caught his interest, creating small treasures hoards in the ship's rigging that he defended with fierce determination. The men had learned to secure anything of value, understanding that Coconut's curiosity knew no bounds. Despite his troublesome habits, the monkey had earned a grudging affection from most of the crew. William Fletcher, the ship's first mate and Blackwood's most trusted advisor, maintained a professional skepticism about keeping a wild animal aboard ship, but even he had been observed sharing scraps of his evening meal with the creature when he thought no one was watching. The men had fashioned a small brass collar for Coconut, both as a mark of ownership and as a way to track his movements when he disappeared into the ship's countless hiding places. Thomas Grimsby, the ship's cook, showed less enthusiasm for their four-legged crew member, frequently complaining about missing ingredients and disturbed food stores. A large, perpetually sweating man with arms like tree trunks and a disposition that could charitably be described as surly, Grimsby ruled his galley with iron discipline and viewed any interference with his domain as a personal affront. His relationship with Coconut had been marked by ongoing territorial disputes, with the monkey regularly attempting to raid the cook's carefully organized supplies. The newest addition to their crew was Jake Morrison, a young sailor who had joined them at their last port of call in Tortuga. Morrison claimed experience aboard merchant vessels and possessed the weathered hands and sun-darkened skin that supported his story. He worked diligently and followed orders without complaint, though something about his manner struck Blackwood as slightly off-kilter. The man asked too many questions about their destinations and seemed particularly interested in the captain's navigation methods. As the morning progressed, the crew settled into the comfortable routines that marked life aboard a well-run vessel. The Caribbean stretched endlessly in all directions, its azure waters promising both opportunity and danger to those bold enough to claim it as their domain. The first cannonball struck the water mere yards from the Siren's Revenge, sending a towering spray of seawater across the starboard deck. Captain Blackwood had barely time to register the sound of the distant explosion before his lookout's voice rang out from the crow's nest, cutting through the morning calm like a blade through silk. Enemy ship approaching fast off the starboard bow, flying the black flag with Silver Serpent. Blackwood's blood turned to ice water in his veins. The Silver Serpent belonged to Captain Red Hand Morrison, a ruthless pirate whose reputation for cruelty had spread throughout the Caribbean like wildfire. Morrison sinned the Bloody Tide, a heavily armed frigate that outgunned most vessels foolish enough to cross her path. More concerning than his firepower was Morrison's tactical brilliance and his network of informants that seemed to know the movements of every significant pirate vessel in these waters. "All hands on deck. Prepare for battle." Blackwood's voice carried across the ship with the authority of a man who had survived 2 decades of maritime warfare. The crew responded with the practiced efficiency of seasoned fighters, each man moving to his assigned position without hesitation or confusion. William Fletcher appeared at Blackwood's side, his cutlass already drawn and his face grim with determination. "Captain, how did Morrison know our position? We've been following routes from your private charts, courses that aren't marked on any official navigation maps." The question struck at the heart of Blackwood's own concerns. Their current position should have been known only to him and Fletcher, yet the Bloody Tide had appeared with the precision of a hunter who knew exactly where to find his prey. The implications were disturbing, suggesting either supernatural knowledge or information obtained through treachery within his own crew. Questions later, "Fighting now," Blackwood replied, drawing his own blade while keeping his eyes on the approaching enemy vessel. The Bloody Tide was closing distance rapidly, her crimson sails billowing with wind that seemed to favor Morrison's approach. Through his spyglass, Blackwood could see enemy crew members preparing for boarding action, their weapons glinting in the morning sunlight like the scales of some predatory sea creature. The second-hand shot came closer, punching a hole through the Siren's Revenge's mizzen sail and sending torn canvas fluttering to the deck, like wounded birds. Blackwood's gunners responded immediately, their own cannons speaking with voices of thunder that rolled across the water. The exchange marked the beginning of what would prove to be one of the most desperate battles of Blackwood's career. Thomas Grimsby emerged from the galley wielding a massive boarding axe, his usual complaints forgotten in the face of mortal danger. Despite his surly disposition, the cook had proven himself a formidable fighter in previous engagements, his strength and reach making him nearly unstoppable in close combat. Behind him came Jake Morrison and several other crew members, all armed and ready to defend their ship and their shares of accumulated treasure. "Morrison's trying to come alongside," Fletcher shouted over the roar of cannon fire. "He wants to board us rather than sink us." Blackwood understood the tactical decision. The Bloody Tide's captain wanted to capture the Siren's Revenge intact, along with her cargo and, more importantly, her navigation chart. Those hand-drawn maps represented years of exploration and represented knowledge that could make Morrison the most powerful pirate captain in the Caribbean. The ships closed to within 50 yards, close enough for Blackwood to see Red Hand Morrison himself standing at his enemy's bow, his infamous crimson-stained right hand gripping a cutlass while his left hand held a loaded pistol. Morrison's reputation for personally leading boarding actions had contributed to his fearsome reputation, and Blackwood knew that the coming fight would likely determine which captain survived to sail these waters. Coconut appeared on deck, chattering excitedly as cannonballs whistled overhead, and the crew prepared their weapons for the boarding action that seemed inevitable. The monkey's presence struck Blackwood as both absurd and somehow fitting. If this were to be his final battle, at least he would face it with his entire crew, including their four-legged mascot, who had brought them so much unexpected entertainment. The Bloody Tide's grappling hooks flew across the narrowing gap between vessels, their iron claws biting deep into the Siren's Revenge's wooden rail. Morrison's crew began hauling the ships together, while Blackwood's men prepared to repel boarders, their weapons ready and their resolve hardened by years of successful battles against overwhelming odds. The ships ground together with a thunderous crash of splintering wood and tangled rigging, their hulls scraping against each other like two great sea beasts locked in mortal combat. Morrison's crew poured across the gap between vessels, their weapons flashing in the morning sun as they sought to overwhelm Blackwood's men through sheer numbers and ferocity. Blackwood found himself engaged in desperate combat with two of Morrison's boarders, his cutlass moving in the deadly dance he had perfected through countless battles. Steel rang against steel as he parried and thrust, his movements economical and precise despite the chaos erupting around him. The deck beneath his feet grew slick with seawater and blood, making each step treacherous and potentially fatal. From his position near the mainmast, he could see Fletcher leading a group of defenders against Morrison's main assault, while Grimsby's boarding axe cleared a wide circle around the ship's wheel. The battle raged with the savage intensity that marked pirate warfare, where quarter was neither asked nor given, and victory belonged to those who fought with both skill and ruthless determination. High in the Bloody Tide's rigging, Morrison had positioned a sniper whose musket commanded a clear view of the Siren's Revenge's deck. The marksman had been waiting for the perfect opportunity to eliminate Blackwood, understanding that the enemy captain's death would likely end organized resistance and allow Morrison to claim both ship and treasure with minimal additional casualties. Blackwood pressed forward, driving his current opponent back against the ship's railing, while simultaneously watching for threats from other directions. His peripheral vision caught movement in the enemy rigging, and some instinct made him glance upward just long enough to see sunlight glinting off a musket barrel. The weapon was aimed directly at his position, and he realized with cold certainty that death was perhaps a heartbeat away. In that frozen moment, as the sniper's finger tightened on his trigger, Coconut launched himself from the ship's rigging with a screech that cut through the battle's den like a blade through canvas. The monkey landed squarely on Blackwood's shoulders, his small hands grasping desperately at the captain's coat, while his weight threw Blackwood off balance and sent him stumbling backward. The musket ball that should have ended Blackwood's life instead whistled through the space where he had been standing, embedding itself in the mainmast with a solid thunk that seemed to echo, despite the surrounding chaos. Blackwood recovered his footing quickly, understanding immediately that Coconut's intervention had saved his life in the most literal sense possible. "Good boy," he shouted to the monkey, who had already scrambled back into the rigging and was chattering angrily at the sniper who had attempted to murder his captain. The animal's timing had been perfect, suggesting either supernatural intuition or an understanding of danger that exceeded anything Blackwood had previously attributed to their four-legged crew member. The tide of battle began to turn in Blackwood's favor, as his crew, inspired by their captain's narrow escape and fighting with renewed determination, gradually pushed Morrison's boarders back toward their own vessel. Fletcher had rallied the defenders near the bow, while Grimsby's axe work had cleared the stern of enemy fighters. The Siren's Revengeance crew fought with the desperate courage of men protecting not just their lives, but their floating home and accumulated treasure. Morrison himself appeared at the gap between ships, his crimson-stained right hand wielding his cutlass with the skill that had made him legendary throughout the Caribbean. He called challenges to Blackwood, seeking single combat that would determine the battle's outcome through personal skill rather than continued bloodshed among their crews. Another time, Blackwood replied, understanding that accepting such a challenge while his crew held the advantage would be tactical foolishness of the highest order. Instead, he directed his gunners to load their cannon with grapeshot, preparing to rake the bloody Tide's deck once Morrison's men had retreated to their own vessel. The enemy captain seemed to understand that his boarding action had failed, and he began calling his surviving crew members back to their ship. The retreat was conducted with professional efficiency, suggesting that Morrison was too experienced to waste lives in a battle that had already been lost. As the grappling hooks were cut and the ships began to separate, Blackwood caught sight of the sniper who had nearly killed him. The man was staring directly at him with an expression of frustrated rage, as if the failed assassination had been a personal affront rather than simply the fortune of war. The bloody Tide disappeared beyond the horizon, like a crimson wound against the azure sky, leaving the Siren's Revenge to assess the damage and tend to her wound. The battle had lasted less than an hour, but its aftermath would reshape the dynamics aboard Blackwood's vessel in ways that none of the crew could have anticipated. Blackwood stood at the ship's railing, watching the enemy vessels retreat while absently stroking Coconut's head. The monkey had returned to perch on his captain's shoulder, chattering softly as if commenting on the morning's events. The brass bell attached to his collar caught the sunlight, creating small flashes of golden light that danced across the weathered deck planking. "That little fellow saved your life, Captain," observed William Fletcher, approaching with a roll of canvas to patch the holes in their mizzen sail. "I've never seen anything like it. The timing was perfect, almost as if he understood what was happening." The first mate's words echoed thoughts that Blackwood had been turning over in his mind since the moment Coconut had knocked him from the sniper's line of fire. Animals possessed instincts that humans often overlooked, but the monkey's intervention had seemed more deliberate than instinctive, more calculated than accidental. "Perhaps we've been underestimating our mascot," Blackwood replied, offering Coconut a piece of dried fruit from his pocket. The monkey accepted the treat with obvious pleasure, his small hands examining the offering carefully before consuming it with delicate precision. Around them, the crew worked to repair battle damage and restore their vessel to proper sailing condition. However, Blackwood noticed subtle changes in how the men interacted with Coconut. Where previously they had treated him with casual affection mixed with mild annoyance at his mischievous behavior, they now regarded him with something approaching reverence. Samuel Torres, the ship's youngest crew member, approached carrying a small bowl of fresh water and some ship's biscuit crumbs. For Coconut Captain thought he might be thirsty after all that excitement. The gesture represented a significant shift from the morning's earlier attitudes, when several crew members had complained about sharing their rations with an animal who contributed nothing to their survival. Now it seemed Coconut had earned his place through an act of heroism that had preserved their captain's life and, by extension, their own fortunes. Thomas Grimsby emerged from his galley, carrying a tray of food for the wounded, his usual scowl replaced by an expression of thoughtful consideration. "Captain, I owe that monkey an apology. Been complaining about him getting into my stores, but seems he's worth more than I gave him credit for." Blackwood nodded acknowledgement of the cook's admission while continuing to study Coconut's behavior. The animal seemed unusually alert, his dark eyes moving constantly as he surveyed the crew's activities. There was an intelligence in that gaze that Blackwood was only now beginning to recognize and appreciate. "Fletcher, how did Morrison know our position?" Blackwood asked, returning to the question that had troubled him since the enemy vessel's appearance. "We've been following routes from my private charts, courses that should be known only to us." Fletcher's expression grew grim as he considered the implications. Either Morrison has supernatural knowledge of our movements, or someone aboard this ship has been sharing information with our enemies. The possibility of treachery within their own crew cast a shadow over their recent victory, transforming celebration into suspicion and paranoia. Blackwood had always prided himself on his ability to judge character and select reliable crew members, but Morrison's precise knowledge of their location suggested that his confidence had been misplaced. In his cabin below deck, Blackwood kept a small locket that had belonged to his late wife Margaret. The silver pendant contained her portrait and a coded love letter she had written during their brief courtship, before his chosen profession had claimed her life through worry and heartbreak. He rarely spoke of Margaret to his crew, understanding that personal weakness could undermine a captain's authority, but her memory influenced many of his decisions regarding loyalty and trust. "We'll need to be more careful about sharing our destination plans," Fletcher continued. "Perhaps limit that knowledge to just the two of us until we can identify how Morrison obtained his information." Blackwood agreed, though the prospect of maintaining such secrecy aboard a vessel where men lived in close quarters presented significant challenges. Pirates relied on mutual trust for their survival, and excessive secrecy could breed the very suspicions and resentments that led to mutiny. Coconut suddenly began chattering and pointing toward Jake Morrison, who was working with several other crew members to repair damaged rigging. The monkey's behavior seemed agitated, almost warning, though Blackwood couldn't determine what had triggered such a response. Over the following days, as the Siren's Revenge continued her course toward Port Royal, Coconut's behavior grew increasingly peculiar. The monkey, who had previously approached all crew members with equal enthusiasm for mischief and companionship, now displayed marked preferences that seemed to follow no pattern the men could understand. Most noticeably, Coconut had begun avoiding Thomas Grimsby entirely, refusing to enter the galley even when tempted with his favorite treats. The cook, who had softened his attitude toward the animal following the recent battle, found himself genuinely puzzled by this sudden rejection. "Don't understand it, Captain," Grimsby confided during the evening meal preparation. "Yesterday, he wouldn't come near me. Today he actually hissed when I tried to offer him some fruit. Acts like I've got the plague or something." Blackwood observed the interaction from the galley entrance, noting how Coconut's entire demeanor changed in Grimsby's presence. The monkey's usual playful curiosity transformed into something resembling suspicion or even fear, his small body tense and ready for immediate flight. Equally strange was Coconut's reaction to Jake Morrison, the newest crew member. Whenever Morrison appeared on deck, the monkey would chatter agitatedly and retreat to the highest rigging, refusing to come down until the man had moved to a different part of the ship. Morrison himself seemed unaware of the animal's hostility, going about his duties with the same diligent efficiency he had shown since joining the crew. "Perhaps he senses something we don't," suggested Fletcher during one of his evening conferences with Blackwood. "Animals often perceive threats that humans miss." The first mate's words carried weight because Fletcher had spent years observing both human nature and animal behavior during his service aboard various vessels. His ability to read people and situations had made him invaluable to Blackwood, particularly when evaluating new crew members or assessing potential threats. Blackwood had begun keeping a careful record of Coconut's reactions, noting which crew members the monkey approached willingly and which ones triggered his apparent anxiety. The pattern that emerged was disturbing in its implications, suggesting that the animal might be responding to some quality that the humans couldn't detect. "I've been reviewing our supply consumption," Fletcher continued, producing a leather-bound ledger that served as the ship's official record of provisions. "Our stores are depleting faster than they should, even accounting for battle damage and the extra rations we provided after the fight." The ledger showed discrepancies that were small individually, but significant in aggregate. Someone had been taking more than their fair share of provisions, either through carelessness or deliberate theft. Such behavior violated the articles of agreement that governed life aboard the ship and could undermine crew morale if left unchecked. "Who has access to the stores besides Grimsby?" Blackwood asked, though he already suspected the answer would complicate their investigation rather than simplify it. Morrison volunteered to help with inventory during his first week aboard. Said he had experience managing supplies on merchant vessels. Grimsby was grateful for the assistance, especially with organizing the dried goods and checking for spoilage. The information added another layer of complexity to the puzzle of Morrison's background and motivation. His eagerness to access the ship's stores could represent either helpful initiative or calculated positioning for some ulterior purpose. That evening, Blackwood decided to conduct his own investigation of the supply situation. Using his captain's privilege to inspect any part of the vessel at any time, he descended to the lower decks where the bulk provisions were stored in wooden barrels and canvas sacks. The storage area showed signs of recent disturbance, with several containers positioned differently than he remembered from his last inspection. More concerning was the discovery of hardtack biscuits that had been opened and resealed, their contents showing evidence of tampering that went beyond normal consumption. Coconut had followed him into the storage area, moving with unusual caution and stopping frequently to test the air with his sensitive nose. When they reached the section containing the altered biscuits, the monkey became extremely agitated, refusing to approach closer and making soft warning sounds that seemed directed at the containers themselves. "What is it, boy?" Blackwood whispered, though he suspected the answer might be more disturbing than he wanted to acknowledge. The monkey's reaction suggested that whatever had been done to those provisions posed a genuine threat to anyone who might consume them. Examining the biscuits more carefully under his lantern's light, Blackwood noticed a faint discoloration that hadn't been present when the supplies were originally loaded. The change was subtle enough to escape casual notice, but significant enough to suggest deliberate adulteration. Blackwood carried several of the suspicious biscuits to his cabin, where he could examine them more thoroughly without alerting the crew to his investigation. Under the bright light of his desk lamp, the discoloration became more apparent, showing a greenish tinge that suggested the presence of some foreign substance mixed into the flour during preparation. The following morning brought an incident that confirmed his worst suspicions. During the regular distribution of breakfast rations, Coconut appeared on deck and immediately began making distressed sounds when Grimsby approached with the day's allocation of hardtack. The monkey's agitation grew more intense as crew members reached for their portions, prompting several men to pause and look questioningly at their captain. "Something's wrong with the monkey," observed Samuel Torres, reaching out to calm Coconut's obvious distress. "He's acting like those biscuits are going to bite him." Blackwood made a quick decision that potentially saved multiple lives. "Nobody eat those biscuits until I've had a chance to inspect them more carefully. Something doesn't seem right." His order prompted immediate murmurs of concern from the crew, but also compliance born from years of trusting their captain's judgment in matters of survival. Grimsby looked genuinely puzzled by the directive, his expression showing confusion rather than guilt or defensiveness. "Captain, I prepared those biscuits myself, Sam, as always. Used the same flour, same methods I've used for months." Blackwood retrieved one of the biscuits he had examined the previous evening and broke it open under full daylight. The interior revealed small dark particles that definitely hadn't been present in their original supplies, particles that looked suspiciously like ground seeds or plant matter that had no business being in ship's bread. "Fletcher, bring me that book of medicinal plants from my cabin," Blackwood ordered. "The one with the illustrations of Caribbean flora." The first mate returned quickly with the requested volume, a comprehensive guide to local plant life that included detailed descriptions of both beneficial and dangerous species found throughout the islands. Blackwood compared the dark particles with various illustrations until he found a match that made his blood run cold. "Castor seeds," he announced grimly, "ground castor seeds mixed into the flour. Enough to cause severe illness, possibly death, depending on the amount consumed." The revelation sent a shock through the assembled crew. Poisoning fellow pirates violated every code of conduct that governed their profession, representing treachery of the most despicable sort. The discovery transformed their investigation from simple theft to attempted murder on a massive scale. Grimsby's face went pale as he realized the implications. "Captain, I swear on my mother's grave, I never put anything like that in my baking. Someone else must have tampered with my stores." Blackwood studied the cook's expression and body language, drawing on years of experience reading men under pressure. Grimsby's shock appeared genuine, his distress at the discovery seeming to reflect honest outrage rather than guilty panic. Who, besides yourself, has had access to the flour stores? Blackwood demanded, though he suspected the answer would point toward their newest crew member. Morrison helped me reorganize the dry goods storage last week. Said he wanted to learn our system so he could assist with inventory when needed. I thought it showed good initiative. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with disturbing clarity. Morrison's eagerness to help with supplies, his detailed questions about ship operations, his presence aboard vessel during the very period when their location had somehow become known to Red Hand Morrison. The coincidences were becoming too numerous to ignore. "Bring Morrison here immediately," Blackwood ordered Fletcher. "But do it quietly. I don't want him to suspect that we've discovered his sabotage." While they waited for Morrison to appear, Coconut had calmed considerably, apparently satisfied that the poisoned food had been identified and removed from circulation. The monkey's behavior throughout the incident had been remarkable in its precision, suggesting an ability to detect dangerous substances that far exceeded anything Blackwood had previously attributed to animal instincts. Morrison appeared within minutes, his expression showing mild curiosity, but no obvious signs of guilt or anxiety. He carried himself with the same confident bearing he had displayed since joining the crew, giving no indication that he suspected his activities had been discovered. "You wanted to see me, Captain?" Blackwood held up one of the tainted biscuits, watching Morrison's face carefully for any reaction. "Can you explain how castor seeds found their way into our flour supplies?" For just an instant, Morrison's composure slipped, his eyes narrowing slightly before he recovered his innocent expression. That brief moment was enough to confirm Blackwood's suspicions about the man's guilt. Morrison's momentary loss of composure was all the confirmation Blackwood needed. The captain's hand moved instinctively to his cutlass hilt, while Fletcher positioned himself to block any potential escape route. The confrontation had reached a critical moment where careful words would matter less than quick reflexes and decisive action. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Captain," Morrison replied, attempting to regain his innocent demeanor. "Perhaps the flour became contaminated during storage. These tropical conditions can cause all sorts of problems with preserved foods." Blackwood studied the man's face with the intensity of a hunter tracking dangerous prey. Morrison's explanation was plausible enough to create reasonable doubt, but his initial reaction had revealed knowledge that an innocent man wouldn't possess. "Strip him down and search his belongings," Blackwood ordered Fletcher. "If Morrison is working for Red Hand, he'll be carrying more than just poisoned flour." Morrison's hand twitched to his belt, where a concealed knife waited in a hidden sheath. However, Fletcher's pistol appeared with practiced speed, its barrel aimed directly at Morrison's chest from a distance that would make missing impossible. "I wouldn't recommend it," Fletcher advised calmly. "Captain's orders are to search you, not to kill you, but that could change depending on how cooperative you choose to be." Realizing that resistance would likely prove fatal, Morrison allowed himself to be disarmed and searched. Hidden in his clothing, they discovered items that no ordinary sailor would carry. A small brass compass with an unusual design, several coded messages written on waterproof parchment, and most damning of all, a signet ring bearing Red Hand Morrison's personal seal. The compass proved particularly interesting upon closer examination. Its case opened to reveal not just navigation instruments, but also a secret compartment containing detailed communications between Morrison and his employer. The messages outlined plans for weakening Blackwood's crew through gradual poisoning, followed by a coordinated attack when they were too sick to mount effective resistance. "Jake Morrison," Blackwood read from one of the documents, "your reports on Blackwood's navigation routes have proven invaluable. Continue monitoring their course changes and crew strength. The next phase of our plan requires precise timing." The revelation explained how Red Hand Morrison had known their exact location during the recent attack. Jake Morrison had been sending regular updates about their movements, effectively turning the Siren's revenge into a trapped animal whose every movement was being tracked by hunters. "How many other ships have you infiltrated?" Blackwood demanded, pressing the point of his cutlass against Morrison's throat with just enough pressure to draw a thin line of blood. Morrison's defiant expression suggested that he had no intention of cooperating beyond what physical coercion might force from him. However, the documents in his compass told a story of extensive espionage activities that had likely compromised multiple pirate operations throughout the Caribbean. Coconut had been watching the proceedings from his perch in the rigging, and now he descended to examine Morrison more closely. The monkey's behavior around the exposed spy was remarkable in its intensity, chattering angrily and making gestures that seemed almost like accusations. His brass bell collar caught the sunlight as he moved, creating flashes of golden light that seemed to emphasize his agitation. "That damned monkey knew," Fletcher observed with grudging admiration. "Been trying to warn us about Morrison for days, but we were too thick to understand what he was telling us." The first mate's words carried the weight of hindsight that made earlier events suddenly clear. Coconut's avoidance of both Morrison and Grimsby now made perfect sense. The animal had somehow detected the threat posed by the spy's presence and the danger lurking in the contaminated food supply. Further searching of Morrison's belongings revealed additional disturbing evidence of the conspiracy against them. Maps showing the locations of other pirate strongholds, detailed descriptions of various crews' strengths and weaknesses, and most troubling of all, a list of names that appeared to represent other spies operating within the pirate community. Red Hand has agents on at least a dozen ships, Fletcher reported after examining the documents more thoroughly. "This isn't just about us. He's been building an intelligence network that covers most of the major pirate operations in these waters." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering in its implications. If Red Hand Morrison had successfully placed agents aboard multiple vessels, he would possess unprecedented knowledge of pirate movements, plans, and vulnerability. Such information would make him nearly unstoppable in his quest to dominate the Caribbean's lawless waters. "What do you want to do with him?" Fletcher asked, gesturing toward their captured spy with obvious distaste. Blackwood considered the options available to him. Pirate justice was traditionally swift and final, but Morrison might possess additional information that could prove valuable to their survival and the safety of other crews. Blackwood called all hands on deck, understanding that the discovery of treachery within their ranks required immediate and public resolution. The crew assembled with the solemn efficiency of men who understood that their captain's summons carried unusual gravity. Morrison stood bound at the mainmast, his earlier confidence replaced by the resigned expression of a man whose deception had been thoroughly exposed. "Men, we have discovered a spy among us," Blackwood announced, his voice carrying across the deck with the authority that had commanded respect throughout his career. "Jake Morrison has been working for Red Hand Morrison, sending information about our movements and attempting to poison our food supplies." The revelation sent a ripple of angry murmurs through the assembled crew. Pirates operated according to codes of loyalty that made betrayal the most serious of offenses, punishable by death according to the articles of agreement that governed their collective existence. Several crew members fingered their weapons, their expressions showing the dangerous anger of men who felt personally betrayed. "Before we decide his fate, I want every man here to understand the full scope of what we've uncovered," Blackwood continued, holding up the documents they had found in Morrison's possession. "This isn't just about one spy on one ship. Red Hand has been building a network of agents throughout the pirate community." He began reading names from Morrison's list, and several crew members recognized vessels and captains they had encountered in various ports. The conspiracy reached far beyond their own situation, threatening the freedom and independence that pirates had fought to establish in Caribbean waters. Samuel Torres stepped forward, his young face showing the outrage of someone whose trust had been violated. "Captain, what guarantee do we have that Morrison was working alone? How do we know there aren't other spies among us?" The question struck at the heart of their dilemma. Once trust had been broken, it became difficult to rebuild without creating an atmosphere of suspicion that could destroy crew unity as effectively as any external threat. Blackwood drew his cutlass, the blade that had been passed down through 3 generations of his family and had become a symbol of his leadership aboard the Siren's Revenge. The weapon caught the morning light as he held it high, its steel reflecting the sun like captured lightning. "Any man who has been secretly working for our enemies, step forward now and confess," he declared, Face judgment with whatever honor you have left, rather than waiting to be discovered through investigation. The deck fell silent except for the sound of wind in the rigging and the gentle creaking of the ship's timbers. Every man present understood that this moment would define their future relationships and determine whether they could continue operating as a unified crew. Coconut descended from his perch in the rigging, moving with deliberate purpose toward the assembled men. The monkey began walking among the crew members, his behavior calm around most of them, but becoming agitated when he approached two specific individuals, Henry Walsh, a gunner who had joined them 6 months earlier, and Peter Hawkins, a rigger whose skills had made him valuable during their recent battle preparations. The animal's reactions were unmistakable to anyone who had witnessed his earlier behavior around Morrison. His chattering and obvious distress when approaching Walsh and Hawkins provided evidence that even the crew's most skeptical members found difficult to dismiss. "Search them both," Blackwood ordered, though his heart sank at the realization that their infiltration problem was more extensive than he had feared. Walsh attempted to run, pushing through the crowd of crew members in a desperate bid to reach the ship's rail and dive overboard. However, Thomas Grimsby intercepted him with his massive arms, lifting the smaller man off his feet and carrying him back to face judgment with the others. The search of Walsh's belongings revealed additional coded messages and a small pouch of gold coins that bore Red Hand Morrison's distinctive markings. Hawkins offered no resistance, apparently understanding that escape was impossible once Coconut had identified him as a threat. 3 spies, Fletcher observed grimly. On a crew of 28 men, Red Hand managed to place 3 agents. That's more than 10% of our total complement. The mathematics were sobering in their implication. If Red Hand had achieved similar penetration map at other vessels, his intelligence network would provide him with detailed knowledge of virtually every significant pirate operation in the Caribbean. Such information would make him nearly omniscient in his ability to anticipate and counter any threats to his growing power. The 3 captured spies stood bound before their former crewmates, their faces showing varying degrees of defiance, resignation, and fear. The crew awaited their captain's judgment, understanding that his decision would establish precedents for how they would handle similar threats in the future. The confrontation erupted with startling suddenness when Walsh broke free from his bonds and lunged toward Blackwood with a concealed knife he had somehow managed to retain despite their search. The blade flashed in the morning sunlight as he drove it toward the captain's chest, desperation lending speed to his attack. Fletcher's pistol barked, the shot echoing across the water as the ball took Walsh in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering across the deck. The wounded spy stumbled but remained upright, his eyes wild with the knowledge that capture meant certain death under pirate law. "Take him alive," Blackwood shouted, understanding that their prisoners might possess additional information about Red Hand's operations. "We need to know everything they can tell us about the spy network." Grimsby's massive hand seized Walsh before he could recover his weapon, lifting him from the deck and pinning his arms with crushing force. The cook's strength made further resistance impossible, though Walsh continued to struggle with the desperate energy, a man facing execution. Hawkins made his own bid for freedom, diving toward the ship's rail in an attempt to reach the sea before his former crewmates could stop him. However, several loyal crew members anticipated his move, forming a human barrier that sent him tumbling back onto the deck with bruised ribs and shattered hopes of escape. Morrison watched these events with calculating eyes, apparently looking for his own opportunity to break free and join his fellow conspirators in their doomed attempt at rebellion. His bonds held firm under Fletcher's watchful supervision, but his expression suggested that he hadn't entirely abandoned hope of escaping judgment. "Secure all 3 of them in the hold," Blackwood ordered. "Use chains if necessary. I want them alive for questioning, but I don't want any more surprises." The ship's articles of agreement, signed by every crew member upon joining the Siren's Revenge, clearly specified the punishment for mutiny and treachery. Death was the prescribed penalty, typically carried out by hanging from the yardarm or being cast adrift in a small boat without supplies. However, the circumstances of their situation demanded extracting maximum information before implementing final justice. Samuel Torres and 2 other crew members dragged the captured spies toward the hatch, leading to the lower decks, their faces showing the grim determination of men cleaning house of dangerous elements. The remaining crew watched in silence, understanding that they had witnessed something that would reshape the dynamics aboard their vessel. "How do we know that's all of them?" asked Peter Daniels, the ship's carpenter, voicing the concern that troubled every man present. "If Red Hand managed to place 3 agents among us, what's to say there aren't others who simply haven't been identified yet?" Blackwood looked toward Coconut, who had returned to his perch near the mainmast and appeared calm for the first time since the investigation had begun. The monkey's relaxed posture suggested that he no longer sensed immediate threats among the assembled crew members. "I believe our 4-legged friend has identified all of them," Blackwood replied, gesturing toward the animal who had proven more reliable than human judgment in detecting treachery. "His instincts have been proven correct in every case so far." The crew's acceptance of Coconut's ability to identify spies represented a remarkable shift in their understanding of animal intelligence and intuition. Men who had spent their lives relying on steel and gunpowder were now placing their trust in a monkey's capacity to sense deception and danger. Fletcher approached with the navigation charts that Morrison had been copying, the stolen information that had made Red Hand's attack possible. The hand-drawn maps represented years of careful exploration and represented knowledge that could have given their enemies a devastating advantage in future encounters. "We need to change our routes immediately," Fletcher advised. "Assume that everything on these charts is now known to Red Hand and his allies. We'll need to find new anchorages and develop fresh approaches to our familiar hunting grounds." The theft of their navigation secrets meant rebuilding much of their operational knowledge from scratch, a process that would take months of careful exploration and could expose them to additional dangers as they mapped unfamiliar waters. "What about the other ships on Morrison's list?" asked Grimsby, wiping blood from his knuckles where he had subdued Walsh. "Shouldn't we try to warn them that they might have spies aboard?" The question raised complex issues of pirate politics and competing loyalties. While professional courtesy suggested sharing their discoveries with other crews, practical considerations demanded focusing on their own survival before attempting to rescue others from similar infiltrations. The interrogation took place in Blackwood's cabin, where the captured spies could be questioned individually without the influence of their fellow conspirators. Morrison proved the most forthcoming, perhaps calculating that cooperation might earn him a quicker death than his companions would receive. "Red Hand has been planning this operation for over 2 years," Morrison confessed, his earlier defiance replaced by the pragmatic honesty of a man with nothing left to lose. "He's got agents on at least 15 ships, maybe more. The goal isn't just treasure or territory. He wants to unite all the pirate crews under his command." Blackwood studied Morrison's face for signs of deception, while Fletcher took careful notes of every revelation. The scope of Red Hand's ambitions exceeded anything they had imagined, suggesting a conspiracy that threatened the very independence that defined pirate culture in the Caribbean. "How does he recruit his agents?" Fletcher asked, understanding that this information could help other crews identify potential infiltrators within their own ranks. "Gold, mostly, but also blackmail when necessary. Some men join willingly because they believe Red Hand's vision of united pirate fleets. Others are coerced through threats against family members or loved ones." Morrison pulled a signet ring from his finger, the gold band bearing Red Hand's distinctive seal of a crimson handprint, surrounded by coiled serpents. The ring served as both identification and authorization, allowing agents to communicate with their handler and receive instructions for their assigned missions. "This ring identifies me as one of his inner circle," Morrison continued. "There are maybe 20 men who carry similar rings, each responsible for managing multiple agents and coordinating operations in different regions." The revelation of Red Hand's organizational structure painted a picture of sophisticated planning that went far beyond typical pirate operations. Most captains operated independently, forming temporary alliances for specific raids, but maintaining their autonomy at all costs. Red Hand's network represented a fundamental threat to that traditional independence. Walsh proved less cooperative, maintaining his silence despite increasingly creative encouragement from Grimsby, whose skills with rope and leverage had been developed through years of handling ship's rigging. However, his personal belongings revealed additional disturbing information about the spy network's methods and objectives. Hidden in his sea chest, they discovered detailed reports on crew morale, fighting capabilities, and leadership weaknesses for multiple pirate vessels. The documents Ward's Red Hand's agents conducted systematic intelligence gathering that would allow him to exploit vulnerabilities when launching attacks or attempting recruitment. "Listen to this," Fletcher said, reading from one of Walsh's reports. "Captain Rodriguez of the Black Pearl shows signs of illness that may limit his effectiveness in combat. Crew loyalty remains strong, but First Mate Vasquez has gambling debts that could make him susceptible to bribery." The clinical assessment of their fellow pirates' weaknesses demonstrated Red Hand's methodical approach to building his intelligence network. Rather than relying on luck or opportunity, he was systematically identifying and exploiting the human frailties that could turn allies into enemies. Hawkins provided the most disturbing revelations during his questioning. Unlike his companions who had been recruited through gold or coercion, he had joined Red Hand's cause out of genuine conviction that the pirate community needed stronger leadership to survive growing pressure from naval forces. "You don't understand what's coming," Hawkins warned, his voice carrying the fervor of a true believer. "The Spanish are building new fleets. The British are expanding their Caribbean patrols. Individual pirate crews won't survive what's headed our way. Only united fleets under strong leadership will have any chance." His arguments contained enough truth to be unsettling. Naval pressure had been increasing throughout the Caribbean, with coordinated efforts to eliminate pirate strongholds and disrupt traditional safe havens. Several notable captains had been captured or killed in recent months, their crews scattered or absorbed by surviving vessels. "Red Hand offers survival through unity," Hawkins continued. "He's already brought 6 major crews under his command. The others can join voluntarily or be eliminated as obstacles to the greater cause." The interrogation revealed that Red Hand's next major operation would target Port Royal, the traditional gathering place where pirates traded information, recruited crew members, and disposed of captured goods. Control of Port Royal would give him leverage over virtually every pirate operation in the region. "When?" Blackwood demanded, understanding that advance warning could save hundreds of lives and preserve the independence they were fighting to maintain. "The new moon, 3 weeks from now. He'll have 8 ships and over 600 men. No force in these waters can stand against him once Port Royal falls." While examining Coconut's brass bell collar more closely that evening, Fletcher made a discovery that changed their understanding of the monkey's remarkable abilities. The collar, which they had assumed was merely decorative, actually contained a hidden compartment that could only be opened by pressing a specific sequence of raised decorations around its circumference. "Captain, you need to see this," Fletcher called, his voice tight with excitement and concern. Inside the secret compartment, wrapped in oiled silk to protect it from moisture, was a small piece of parchment covered with faded Spanish text and what appeared to be coded symbols. Blackwood carefully unfolded the fragile document, recognizing immediately that it represented something far more significant than a simple message. The handwriting showed the careful precision of an educated man, while the paper's quality suggested it had been valuable enough to preserve through considerable hardship. "It's a ship's log entry," Blackwood translated slowly, his knowledge of Spanish gained through years of raiding vessels from various nations. "Written by Captain Eduardo Vasquez of the merchant vessel Santa Isabella. The date is nearly 4 months ago." As he continued reading, the document revealed a tragic story that explained Coconut's unusual intelligence and his ability to identify threats that humans missed. Captain Vasquez had been transporting a valuable cargo when his ship was attacked by Red Hand Morrison's fleet under false flag, appearing as Spanish naval vessels until it was too late for the merchant captain to escape. "Vasquez wasn't just a merchant captain," Blackwood continued reading. "He was a former Spanish naval officer who had retired to private trading. He recognized the deception immediately, but couldn't convince his crew of the danger until Red Hand's men were already boarding. The log entry described a brutal battle in which Vasquez's crew was systematically slaughtered, despite their attempts to surrender. Red Hand had been searching for specific documents that Vasquez carried, intelligence about Spanish naval movements that would have given the pirate tremendous strategic advantages. "Listen to this," Blackwood said, his voice growing grim as he reached the final portions of Vasquez's account. "My faithful companion Coconut has learned to identify the enemy agents who have been placed among honest crews. The animal's instincts have proven more reliable than human judgment in detecting those who serve Red Hand's conspiracy. I pray that someone will recognize his value and use his abilities to protect others from the fate that has befallen my crew." The revelation transformed their understanding of Coconut's behavior entirely. The monkey hadn't simply developed an unusual ability to sense danger. He had been trained by his previous owner to recognize the subtle signs that identified Red Hand's agents, becoming a living weapon against the spy network that threatened the pirate community. Vasquez managed to hide this message in Coconut's collar before he died, Fletcher observed, examining the document's careful preparation. He was hoping that whoever found the monkey would discover his warning and use it to fight back against Red Hand's infiltration. Further examination of the collar revealed additional compartments containing small amounts of gold and precious stones, apparently intended to ensure that whoever rescued Coconut would have both incentive and resources to care for the animal. Vasquez had been preparing for his own death while trying to ensure his companion's survival and continued usefulness. The monkey has been seeking revenge, Blackwood realized, the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together into a coherent picture. Not just protecting us, but actively hunting Red Hand's agents wherever he might find them. The understanding cast Coconut's recent behavior in an entirely new light. His avoidance of Morrison, Walsh, and Hawkins hadn't been simple animal instinct, but rather the methodical identification of enemies using techniques taught by a man who had understood the scope of Red Hand's conspiracy before anyone else. That evening, as they prepared to dispose of their captured spies according to pirate justice, Blackwood found himself studying Coconut with newfound respect and sympathy. The small animal had lost his beloved master to Red Hand's treachery and had been carrying the burden of that knowledge for months, trying to protect new companions from suffering the same fate. "You've been fighting this war longer than any of us," Blackwood murmured, offering Coconut a piece of dried fruit and receiving a gentle touch from the monkey's small hand in return. "But you won't have to fight it alone anymore." The discovery of Vasquez's journal transformed their mission from simple survival to active participation in a larger struggle for the soul of the pirate community. They now understood that Red Hand's conspiracy threatened not just individual crews, but the entire culture of independence and freedom that had flourished in Caribbean waters. The execution of the 3 spies at dawn marked a turning point in the Siren's Revenge's mission. Rather than simply protecting themselves from Red Hand's conspiracy, Blackwood and his crew committed themselves to actively disrupting the network that threatened their way of life. The decision transformed them from potential victims into hunters, carrying forward Captain Vasquez's mission with the determination of men who understood the stakes involved. Using information extracted from their interrogations, Blackwood plotted a course toward Red Hand's secret base, a hidden cove on the northwestern coast of Jamaica that served as headquarters for his expanding fleet. The location had been carefully chosen for its natural defenses and proximity to major shipping lanes, providing both security and access to potential targets. According to Morrison's intelligence, Red Hand keeps his treasure fleet anchored in a lagoon protected by coral reefs and hidden gun emplacements, Fletcher reported while studying the charts they had recovered. The entrance channel is narrow enough that 2 ships could block any escape route. The tactical challenges were significant, but not insurmountable for a crew motivated by the knowledge that their independence depended on eliminating Red Hand's threat. More importantly, they now possessed Coconut's unique abilities to identify enemy agents, giving them an advantage that Red Hand wouldn't expect or understand. Preparation for the assault required careful planning that took into account both their numerical disadvantage and the element of surprise that represented their primary tactical asset. Blackwood divided his crew into specialized teams, each with specific responsibilities during the attack phase. "Samuel, you'll lead the shore party with 4 men," Blackwood assigned. "Your job is to locate and disable the coastal artillery before it can damage our ship during the approach. Use the cover of darkness and take no unnecessary risks." Turas nodded his understanding, his young face showing the serious determination of a man who had earned his captain's trust through demonstrated competence and loyalty. The assignment represented significant responsibility for someone his age, but Blackwood had observed his steady nerves during their recent crisis. "Grimsby, you and 3 volunteers will handle the prisoners we expect to liberate from Red Hand's holding areas." Captain Vasquez mentioned that Red Hand keeps captured crews alive for potential recruitment or ransom. "We'll need to organize their evacuation quickly once the fighting starts." The cook's massive frame and practical experience made him ideal for managing potentially panicked civilians while maintaining security against possible infiltrators among the rescued prisoners. His recent solidarity with Coconut also suggested he understood the importance of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Fletcher would remain aboard the Siren's Revenge with a skeleton crew to provide naval gunfire support and maintain their escape route. His knowledge of ship handling and artillery made him indispensable for coordinating the complex timing required for a successful withdrawal. "What about Coconut?" Torres asked, gesturing toward the monkey who had been listening to their planning with apparent interest. "His abilities could be useful for identifying any agents among the prisoners we rescue." Blackwood considered the suggestion carefully. Coconut's talent for detecting Red Hand spies could indeed prove valuable, but the assault would be dangerous enough without worrying about protecting their 4-legged crew member during active combat. However, among Morrison's possessions they had discovered an ancient Spanish gold crucifix that bore engravings matching symbols from Vasquez's journal. The religious artifact apparently served as a key to locating specific areas within Red Hand's base, including the treasure vaults where accumulated pirate wealth was stored. The crucifix shows directional markings that correspond to landmarks around the lagoon, Blackwood explained, holding the ornate cross up to catch the lamplight. Vasquez must have scouted Red Hand's base before his final voyage, gathering intelligence about its layout and defenses. The discovery suggested that their assault had been anticipated and prepared for by the murdered Spanish captain, whose foresight had provided them with crucial tactical advantages. Vasquez had died fighting Red Hand's conspiracy, but his intelligence continued to serve those who would carry on his mission. "We go in at dawn, 3 days from now," Blackwood announced. "That gives us time to reach the lagoon, scout their defenses, and position ourselves for maximum surprise. Remember, our goal isn't just to survive this encounter, but to cripple Red Hand's operation permanently." The crew received their orders with the grim satisfaction of men who understood they were fighting for more than personal survival. The upcoming battle would determine whether Red Hand's vision of united pirate fleets would succeed or whether the traditional independence of Caribbean pirates would endure. The hidden cove revealed itself at dawn like a fortress carved from living rock, its entrance concealed behind jagged coral formations that would tear the hull from any vessel attempting passage without precise knowledge of the safe channel. Red Hand had chosen his stronghold well, creating a base that offered both complete concealment and formidable natural defenses. Through his spyglass, Blackwood counted 8 vessels anchored in the protected lagoon, their combined firepower representing more naval strength than most Caribbean ports could muster. The sight was sobering, confirming that Red Hand's ambitions were backed by the resources necessary to challenge any force that opposed his expansion. "There's the channel markers Vasquez described," Fletcher observed, pointing toward a series of carved wooden posts that were nearly invisible against the rocky shoreline. "The Spanish cross indicates we follow the westward markers first, then turn east after the 3rd post." Coconut perched on Blackwood's shoulder, his small body tense with apparent recognition of their surroundings. The monkey's behavior suggested he remembered this place from his previous visit with Captain Vasquez, when the lagoon had been the site of his beloved master's murder. Samuel Torres and his shore party had already departed in the ship's boat, using pre-dawn darkness to approach the coastal gun emplacements that protected the cove's entrance. Their success would determine whether the Siren's Revenge could enter the lagoon without being blown to pieces by hidden artillery. Signal from Torres, reported the lookout, interpreting the carefully arranged lantern flashes that indicated the shore party had successfully neutralized the first battery. Western guns are silent, still working on the eastern position. The assault plan required precise timing to coordinate naval and ground elements while maximizing their surprise advantage. Red Hand's crew would be expecting routine supply runs or returning agents, not a direct attack on their supposedly secret stronghold. As the Siren's Revenge began her approach through the channel, Blackwood could see the extensive modifications Red Hand had made to transform the natural lagoon into a pirate fortress. Wooden platforms extended over the water to provide additional docking space, while armed patrols moved along elevated walkways that commanded clear views of all approaches. There, Fletcher pointed toward a cluster of buildings near the lagoon's eastern shore. The treasure vaults Vasquez marked on his crucifix diagram, and those smaller structures must be the prisoner holding areas Morrison described. The layout matched the intelligence they had gathered, suggesting that their information remained accurate, despite the months that had passed since Vasquez's reconnaissance mission. However, Red Hand's forces appeared more numerous and better organized than their captured spies had indicated. The first cannon shot from shore shattered the morning calm as one of Torres's targeted gun positions opened fire with devastating effect. The iron ball struck the Siren's Revenge's bow, sending splinters flying across the deck and punching a hole that would require immediate attention to prevent flooding. "Return fire," Blackwood commanded, and his gunners responded with carefully aimed shots that silenced the offending battery in a shower of stone and splintered wood. The exchange marked the beginning of a battle that would test both their courage and their tactical planning. Red Hand's ships began weighing anchor with surprising speed, suggesting that their arrival hadn't achieved the complete surprise they had hoped for. Either sentries had spotted their approach, or some other warning system had alerted the defenders to prepare for combat. "Look there," Fletcher shouted, pointing toward the largest of the anchored vessels. "That's the Bloody Tide. Red Hand is flying his personal flag." The crimson banner with its silver serpent design fluttered from the mainmast of Red Hand's flagship, while crew members scrambled to prepare their weapons for the battle that was now inevitable. The sight of their nemesis so close at hand sent a thrill of anticipation through Blackwood's crew, who understood they were finally facing the architect of the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed them. Coconut began chattering excitedly, pointing toward various locations around the lagoon with what appeared to be recognition and strategic understanding. The monkey seemed to remember specific details from his previous visit, information that could prove valuable as the battle developed. "Torres is signaling success," reported the lookout. "Eastern batteries neutralized. Shore party is moving toward the prisoner compounds." The coordinated assault was proceeding according to plan, but Blackwood knew that their initial success would mean nothing if they couldn't maintain their advantage against Red Hand's superior numbers. The real test would come when the enemy ships completed their preparations and began maneuvering for combat in the confined waters of the lagoon. The lagoon erupted into chaos as Red Hand's fleet maneuvered for combat position, their superior numbers creating a deadly crossfire that threatened to overwhelm the Siren's Revenge through sheer volume of gunfire. Blackwood responded by using the confined waters to his advantage, positioning his ship where only 2 enemy vessels could engage him simultaneously while the others were blocked by their own allies. "Hard to starboard," Blackwood shouted over the roar of cannon fire. "Put us between those 2 sloops and the rocky outcropping." Fletcher spun the wheel with practiced precision, using his intimate knowledge of ship handling to thread their vessel through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow. The Siren's Revenge responded like a living creature, her hull scraping against submerged rocks that would have torn apart a less expertly handled vessel. Red Hand Morrison stood at the bow of the Bloody Tide, his infamous crimson-stained cutlass reflecting the morning sunlight as he directed his fleet's movements with hand signals and shouted commands. Even across the water-covered distance, Blackwood could see the cold calculation in his enemy's eyes, the strategic mind that had made him the most feared pirate captain in Caribbean waters. The two ships began a deadly dance of approach and withdrawal, each captain seeking the positioning advantage that would allow a decisive blow while avoiding the concentrated firepower that could end the battle in a single devastating broadside. Red Hand possessed superior numbers, but Blackwood held the advantages of desperation and righteous anger that had driven him to attack against overwhelming odds. Coconut crouched near the ship's wheel, his small body pressed against the wooden housing for protection from the flying splinters and iron fragments that filled the air around them. Despite his obvious fear, the monkey remained alert and focused, occasionally pointing toward enemy positions with what appeared to be tactical understanding. Samuel Torres's voice carried across the water from shore, where his party had successfully liberated the prisoner compounds and discovered a horrifying scene of Islamic brutality. "We've got over 40 prisoners, including Captain Rodriguez and most of his crew from the Black Pearl." The news that Rodriguez had survived Red Hand's attack provided both encouragement and additional urgency to their mission. If they could extract the prisoners successfully, they would not only deal a significant blow to Red Hand's operations, but also rescue valuable allies who could testify to his crimes throughout the pirate community. The Bloody Tide closed distance with predatory patience, her gun ports open and ready to deliver the concentrated firepower that had made her legendary throughout the Caribbean. Red Hand stood at his ship's rail, close enough now for Blackwood to see the calculating smile that had preceded the deaths of countless victims. "Prepare for boarding action," Red Hand's voice carried across the water with commanding authority. "I want Blackwood taken alive. His navigation charts are worth more than his corpse." The declaration confirmed what Blackwood had suspected about Red Hand's ultimate objectives. Control of his hand-drawn charts would give the enemy captain access to secret routes and hidden anchorages throughout the Caribbean, effectively completing his domination of pirate operations in the region. As the ships ground together with the thunderous crash of splintering wood and tangled rigging, Coconut suddenly launched himself from the Siren's Revenge toward the Bloody Tide, his small form arcing through the air with desperate courage. The monkey landed among Red Hand's crew, immediately creating chaos by identifying and attacking specific individuals with focused fury. "The monkey knows which ones are the real threats," Fletcher observed, with amazement, watching Coconut systematically target Red Hand's most experienced fighters while avoiding the ordinary crew members who posed less danger. Red Hand himself drew his cutlass and advanced toward Blackwood across the gap between their vessels, his crimson blade catching the sunlight like captured fire. The weapon was legendary throughout the Caribbean, supposedly cursed with the blood of every captain who had fallen before Red Hand's tactical brilliance and personal combat skills. Finally, Red Hand called out, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a hunter who had cornered his prey after a long chase. "Captain Blackwood and his famous navigation secrets. You've led me quite a chase, but every hunt eventually ends with the predator claiming his pride." Blackwood drew his own cutlass, the family blade that had served 3 generations of his lineage with honor and courage. The steel rang as it cleared the scabbard, its edge honed to razor sharpness and balanced for the deadly dance that would determine not just his own fate, but the future of pirate independence in Caribbean waters. The duel began with the calculated precision of 2 masters, who understood that a single mistake would prove fatal. Red Hand attacked with the aggressive confidence that had served him well in countless previous encounters, his crimson cutlass weaving patterns of death through the air between them. Blackwood responded with the defensive expertise of a man fighting for more than personal survival. Each parry and riposte designed to protect not just his own life, but the independence of every pirate crew in Caribbean waters. Steel rang against steel as the 2 captains tested each other's skills, their footwork carrying them across the Bloody Tide's deck, while crew members from both ships watched with the fascination of men witnessing a battle that would reshape their world. Red Hand possessed the advantages of youth and reach, but Blackwood fought with the desperate intensity of a man who understood the stakes involved. You cannot win, Blackwood. Red Hand taunted between exchanges, his breathing still controlled despite the intensity of their combat. Even if you kill me, my network will continue operating. Too many captains have already pledged their loyalty to my cause. Blackwood saved his breath for fighting, understanding that Red Hand's words were calculated to distract him from the deadly dance of blade work that demanded total concentration. However, the enemy captain's confidence suggested that the spy network had achieved even greater penetration than their interrogations had revealed. Coconut's intervention proved decisive at the crucial moment. The monkey had been systematically disrupting Red Hand's crew by identifying and harassing key personnel, but now he focused his attention on the duel itself. As Red Hand launched a particularly aggressive attack sequence, Coconut leaped onto his sword arm, chattering furiously and disrupting the precise timing that made the enemy captain so dangerous. Red Hand attempted to shake off the small attacker while maintaining his defensive posture, but the momentary distraction provided Blackwood with the opening he needed. His family cutlass found the gap in Red Hand's guard, sliding between ribs to pierce the heart that had orchestrated so much treachery and death throughout the Caribbean. Impossible, Red Hand gasped, his crimson cutlass falling from nerveless fingers to clatter across the deck. My network, my plans. Everything was perfectly arranged. Your plans didn't account for the loyalty of a small monkey to his murdered master. Blackwood replied, supporting his dying enemy as Red Hand's strength failed. Captain Vasquez sends his regard. The revelation of Coconut's true mission struck Red Hand with the force of understanding that came too late to matter. His eyes widened as he realized that his most carefully laid plans had been undermined by an intelligence source he had never suspected. An animal whose devotion to a dead master had driven him to seek justice against impossible odds. Red Hand's death effectively ended organized resistance throughout the lagoon, as his surviving crew members laid down their weapons rather than continuing a battle that no longer served any strategic purpose. The carefully constructed network of loyalty and fear that had held his conspiracy together collapsed with startling suddenness, leaving individual ships to negotiate their own surrenders. Captain Rodriguez sends his gratitude, Samuel Torres reported, as his shore party returned with the liberated prisoners. Says Red Hand had been trying to recruit his crew through a combination of torture and promises of wealth. Most of his men remained loyal despite everything they suffered. The rescued prisoners provided additional intelligence about Red Hand's operations, revealing the locations of other bases and the identities of remaining network agents who might attempt to continue the conspiracy. However, without Red Hand's charismatic leadership and strategic vision, the spy network seemed likely to fragment into ineffective individual cells. Blackwood ordered his crew to secure Red Hand's treasure vaults, which contained accumulated wealth from dozens of successful raids and ransom operations. The gold and precious stones represented resources that could fund legitimate pirate operations for years, while providing compensation for crews who had suffered losses due to the conspiracy. "What do we do with the bloody tie?" Fletcher asked, gesturing toward Red Hand's flagship, which represented both a valuable prize and a symbol of the tyranny they had fought to defeat. Blackwood considered the question carefully, understanding that his decision would send a message throughout the Caribbean about the ultimate fate of those who threatened pirate independence. The ship could serve as a powerful addition to their own fleet, but it also carried the stain of Red Hand's crimes against his fellow pirates. "Burn her," he decided finally. "Let every pirate in these waters know that treachery against our community will be met with total destruction, not profitable incorporation." The return voyage to Port Royal took on the character of a triumphant procession, as word of Red Hand's defeat spread through the Caribbean pirate community. Ships that had been infiltrated by enemy agents reported the sudden disappearance of suspicious crew members, while others sent representatives to thank Blackwood for eliminating the threat that had endangered their independence. Aboard the Siren's Revenge, the crew's relationship with Coconut had transformed completely from their initial casual acceptance of a ship's mascot to reverent recognition of a warrior who had proven himself in the most crucial battle of their lives. The monkey wore a new collar fashioned from Red Hand's own gold, its surface engraved with symbols honoring both his fallen master and his own contributions to their victory. "Never thought I'd see the day when we'd be taking orders from a monkey," Samuel Torres observed, with good-natured resignation as Coconut indicated his preference for their evening anchorage by chattering and pointing toward a protected cove. But if his judgment about enemies was that good, maybe his navigation instincts are worth following too. The crew had voted unanimously to modify their ship's flag, adding a small monkey silhouette beneath the traditional skull and crossbones to commemorate Coconut's role in their survival. The symbolic recognition represented more than simple gratitude. It acknowledged that intelligence and courage could emerge from unexpected sources and deserved respect regardless of their form. Captain Rodriguez, sailing alongside them aboard his recovered vessel, the Black Pearl, had shared disturbing details about Red Hand's recruitment methods during their evening conferences. The systematic approach to breaking down crew loyalty had been more sophisticated than anyone had imagined, involving careful psychological manipulation combined with strategic applications of reward and punishment. He would identify the most influential crew members first, Rodriguez explained during one of their shipboard dinners, then work to turn them through whatever means proved most effective. Some men could be bought with gold, others with promises of advancement, and a few responded only to threats against their families. The intelligence provided valuable insights into how similar operations might be detected and countered in the future. More importantly, it revealed that Red Hand's network had been more extensive than even their captured agents had understood. With cells operating in virtually every major port throughout the Caribbean, William Fletcher had been working with charts recovered from Red Hand's base to map the full extent of the conspiracy's reach. The documents revealed safe houses, communication routes, and funding sources that had supported operations across thousands of miles of Caribbean waters. "Look at this," Fletcher said, spreading a particularly detailed map across the table in Blackwood's cabin. Red Hand had established supply depots on at least 20 different islands, positioned to support extended operations anywhere in our traditional hunting ground. The logistical sophistication of the network impressed even seasoned pirates who had learned to appreciate careful planning and resource management. Red Hand had been building the infrastructure for a maritime empire that would have dwarfed any previous pirate confederation in both scope and effectiveness. Thomas Grimsby reported that morale among the crew had reached levels he hadn't seen since their most successful treasure raids. The knowledge that they had participated in preserving pirate independence throughout the Caribbean had given their recent battles a significance that transcended personal survival or financial gain. "Men are talking about this voyage like it's something their grandchildren will want to hear about," Grimsby observed while preparing the evening meal. "Not just another fight for treasure, but a real war against tyranny that threatens everything we've built out here." The cook's assessment reflected broader changes in how the crew viewed their profession and their place in the complex political landscape of the Caribbean. They had evolved from simple raiders seeking personal profit to defenders of a way of life that valued independence above security or conventional success. As they approached familiar waters near Port Royal, Coconut spent increasing amounts of time in the ship's rigging, scanning the horizon with apparent anticipation. His behavior suggested recognition of their destination, and perhaps eagerness to reach a place where his remarkable story could be shared with the broader pirate community. "He knows we're almost home," Blackwood observed, watching the monkeys' animated surveillance of their surroundings. "Probably looking forward to solid ground and fresh fruit that doesn't come from ship's stores." The observation prompted laughter from crew members who had grown accustomed to treating Coconut's preferences as seriously as they would those of any human crew member. His elevated status had been earned through demonstrated courage and intelligence that commanded respect from men who rarely acknowledged authority they hadn't chosen to accept. Port Royal welcomed the Siren's revenge with the enthusiasm reserved for heroes returning from legendary voyages. Word of Red Hand Morrison's defeat had preceded their arrival, carried by merchant vessels and fishing boats, whose crews had witnessed the smoke rising from the burning bloody tide. The harbor filled with well-wishers eager to hear first-hand accounts of the battle that had preserved their independence. Blackwood stood at his ship's bow as they approached the familiar docks, Coconut perched proudly on his shoulder, wearing his new golden collar like a badge of honor earned through blood and courage. The monkey surveyed the crowded waterfront with apparent satisfaction, perhaps understanding that their mission had been completed successfully and that the threat to his adopted family had been permanently eliminated. "Captain," Fletcher approached with the new logbook they had begun keeping since discovering Coconut's true abilities. "What should I record as his official position aboard ship?" The question represented more than simple record-keeping. Pirates maintained careful documentation of crew roles and responsibilities, both for practical purposes and to ensure proper distribution of treasure shares. Coconut's contributions to their survival and success demanded formal recognition within their organizational structure. Ship's intelligence officer, Blackwood, decided after careful consideration, with voting rights equal to any human crew member. His judgment about personnel matters has proven more reliable than our own, and he's earned the right to participate in decisions that affect our collective welfare. The designation was unprecedented in pirate history, but the crew's enthusiastic acceptance demonstrated their complete transformation from skepticism to respect for their four-legged companion. Several men nodded approval, understanding that Coconut's abilities represented a strategic advantage they couldn't afford to waste through conventional thinking about animal limitations. As they secured the Siren's Revenge to her moorings, representatives from other pirate crews approached to request detailed information about Red Hand's network and methods. Blackwood realized that their victory had positioned them as leaders in the broader struggle to preserve pirate independence against future threats. "We've got requests for meetings from captains representing over 20 ships," Fletcher reported while reviewing the messages that had accumulated during their approach to port. "Everyone wants to know how to identify potential spies among their crews." The responsibility was sobering but also gratifying. Their battle against Red Hand's conspiracy had evolved into something larger than personal survival, becoming a catalyst for improved cooperation and security throughout the pirate community. That evening, as Blackwood made his first entry in their new logbook, he reflected on the lessons learned through their recent trials. The traditional pirate emphasis on individual strength and personal cunning had proven insufficient against organized enemies who understood the value of information and systematic infiltration. "First entry, new logbook," he wrote carefully with his quill pen. Coconut officially recognized as ship's intelligence officer with full crew privileges. His service to this vessel and the pirate community has exceeded that of many human crew members. Future operations will incorporate his abilities for identifying threats and assessing personnel reliability. The entry marked a formal recognition of changes that had already transformed how they operated as a crew. Coconut's insights would be sought and valued in future decisions about recruitment, route planning, and security measures that affected their survival. Outside the cabin windows, Port Royal's taverns filled with pirates, celebrating the defeat of tyranny and the preservation of their traditional freedoms. Stories of Coconut's heroism spread through the drinking establishments like wildfire, growing more elaborate with each rowing, but maintaining their essential truth about courage appearing in unexpected forms. "Tomorrow we'll begin planning our next voyage," Blackwood told Coconut, who had settled into his favorite sleeping spot near the captain's chart table. "But tonight, we rest and remember what we've learned about trusting wisdom wherever we find it." The monkey's contented chattering suggested agreement with this philosophy as he settled down for sleep, his new golden collar catching the lamplight like a small beacon of hope in a world that had grown more dangerous, but also more united through their shared struggle against common enemies.